Hi, welcome back. This is episode 18 of Coach Barnabas, and I just want to welcome you back. Thank you for joining me. Um, this particular episode, a little different feel. Normally, I would start with banjos and Nigel, my disembodied British voice of sophistication, but going to start a little differently this time, just because to be kind of set the stage a little bit, as was the case when I had a written blog some years ago. I often used it almost as a form of self medication, where I would work through things that I was kind of processing, and just kind of sharing my process, sharing what I'm learning, and what I'm going through in a way that helps me kind of noodle it through, but also it serves as a real life thing for maybe people who are going through something similar, processing something similar in their life. So today's going to be kind of one of those. So let me just kind of jump in with tell I record this. It's a Thursday. This previous Saturday, I early in the morning got a notification, a text message from a friend of mine who said another friend of ours from our church was not looking good. Things are not looking good. This individual's had some serious health problems with cancer pretty much the entire time I've known him. As I mentioned before, I moved to Rhode Island 10 years ago, and his battle with cancer began about 11 years ago. So, it's been throughout the course of our friendship and even a little bit further, in and out, remission and fine, and then more tests and therapies and things like that. And so when I received a message about a week ago saying he was in a lot of pain, I figured it was something else. Maybe he tweaked his back or something. And only to find out that the cancer had returned way more aggressively. And so anyway, Saturday comes and get the message that, things are not looking good. So right then I told Sarah, I said, we need to go see him. And we got ready, and literally how things worked out was, as we're walking in the room at the facility where he was, the nurse was literally leaning over him, checking for a heartbeat, and then took the stethoscope off and pronounced that he had passed. And it was to say it was an awkward moment, puts the emphasis on me. It was awkward for me and for my wife, because that's such I mean, you can imagine. I don't need to tell you. But I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know if he'd be awake, and he had just a funny sense of humor. I didn't know if he'd be cracking jokes or what, but it turned out to be the moment, right? So it was very profound to us. And when his wife came over to hug us and thank us for coming, and to just share a moment of mutual grief, I apologized. I said, "Well, this is like the worst timing ever." And she said, "No, it's actually the best timing," which was very gracious of her to say. But in the days since, and all that day, and all the time since, I've just been kind of asking the Lord, why? Why did you choose that? Because honestly, we had a couple on the way there. I'd never been to this facility before. We're using GPS, and there's a couple times where the directions were a little vague, and so I'd miss a turn. I have to turn around, come back, and it would take some time. Then you get back on the right course, and it would tell you to take streets that weren't actually streets. It'd be like a parking lot. But apparently the GPS recognized this as a street. And so, I'm cutting through things. And then I ended up missing the turn into the facility because that was, again, a little vague, not real good signage for the facility. So, we just wasted a lot of time just getting to the place. And to think that, had I been there without those complications, I don't know what would have happened, but for whatever reason, I just look at it as, okay, God wanted us to be there at the moment we got there. Not a minute sooner, not a minute later. And so I've been processing that, just kind of going, why, and I still don't know the answer to that, and may never. Some things are just intended to be mysteries. But you'll notice the title of this episode is Why Do Bad Things Happen to Good People? And I think that's probably the number one question people ask Christians when they ask about God. And, if God's such a good, loving God, why do bad things happen to good people? And going back to my friend, several years ago, we were in the worship team together. I was the director, and he played bass for us. And he had let me know that he was going to go in for some testing that week and asked us to pray for him. And so, he pulled me aside privately and kind of told me the situation. Said, "Would you mind praying for me?" At the end of rehearsal, I said, "Absolutely." So, as we wrapped up our rehearsal, I just kind of set the stage for him, metaphorically speaking, and asked him to just share from his heart. And he said something that I will never forget. I've shared it with many people before, and I'm going to share it with you now. As he was, saying his situation and speaking it out because he's been down this road before, he said something, again, that was so profound and so inspirational to me. And to this day, I can't tell you I would be able to say what he said. So let me kind of share it with you. As he was saying, "Yep, we're going in for testing. Of course, we hope it's negative and everything's fine." But he said, "But if I do have cancer, and if it turns out that it's back, then I'm going to be a missionary in the oncology unit." And I was just blown away at that point. He was willing to accept the assignment, even if it meant something bad happening in his life, something bad happening in his body. If that's what it meant to embed him into a special place where he could be useful for God, then that's what he was going to do. And that's what he did do when he had those situations where he'd have to go in for chemos. He'd bring his guitar in and lead worship songs. And the people enjoyed it. And people would respond to that. And that's who he was. And such a humble and simple and everyday kind of guy. Nothing flashy about him. He loved the Three Stooges in NASCAR. Okay, just an everyday kind of guy. But he had such a passion for God and for sharing God with people in a humble, unassuming, absolutely nothing intimidating or overpowering about him. He was kind of a smaller guy. So there just was nothing about him physically that would make you recoil at the thought, "Oh, this guy's going to cram God down my throat." Because that's just not who he was. It wasn't his presentation. He's just a happy guy. And yet he accepted this assignment if that's what it was going to take. And so in thinking that through, and like I said, it's been very profound and it's affected me over the years. And like I said a moment ago, I'm not sure that if I had that same prognosis, I'd had that same attitude, to be honest with you. I don't know. I haven't been down that road, and I can't say I would embrace it the way he was willing to embrace it and did embrace it. But it did get me thinking to that age-old question that people commonly ask is, why do bad things happen to good people? And I thought of this verse I want to share with you. And for those of you who have maybe been in the church for some time, this is a very well-known verse. But it says, this is Romans 8:28, "And we know that God works all things together for the good of those who love him, who are called according to his purpose." And, this is a very well-known passage of a very well-known verse. I don't want to use the word famous because it's the Bible, right? And we overuse the term famous. But what this means, you'll notice, let me go back to it here. If you're watching on the YouTube, I have a little screen here with the verse on it. So God works all things together, not some things, not most of the things, not on occasion things. He works all things together for the good of those who love him, who are called according to his purpose. And some things jumped out at me. One is, again, all things work together for the good of those who love God and are called according to his purpose. And when I think of purpose, okay, what is the purpose of getting cancer? What is the purpose of getting sick? What is the purpose of having bad things happen in our lives? It could be anything, but I want to look at it from a different perspective, that God will repurpose those things in our lives for his purpose. Okay. So perhaps you've been through a really difficult period in your life, maybe through childhood or even into your adult life. That was very difficult, very challenging. And maybe it drove you to where you are today in having a relationship with God. Or maybe you're seeking, maybe you're just, you've tried it your way and it hasn't been good, but you want to break that chain, you want to break that cycle. And so you are looking for something and looking to finally do it. It hasn't been 12-step programs. It hasn't been this. It hasn't been that. But maybe it's just, God wants to take those things and work them for your good. Okay. And he repurposes those things because, just as my friend Steve, he accepted his assignment that cancer would give him unique access to a place where I can't go. Okay, because it's shut off to people who have cancer, and while I might be able to have a friendship or relationship with them, for the hours that they sit together getting their chemo, he had an audience with them and could share with them, share from his life, or let them talk to him, because they had a shared experience that only they could relate to in a way at that level. They were going through it together. And there are times in our lives when we go through something profound and sometimes awful, that gives us a unique insight to connect with other people. Okay, that we have a unique connection to be able to help them through it because we've been through it. Or we're going through something and we can connect with somebody else who's been there, been down that road. And because they went through the awful experience, there's some credibility there, right? Because you have that shared experience. What did you do to get through this? How did you get through it? I don't know if I can get through this. And this person can share with you how they did endure and get out the other side. So I just felt like that was on my heart. I wanted to kind of share that with you. And even earlier today, as you may know, I'm a fan of like true crime shows. And I was watching this episode about this young girl who's a teenage girl who was a Christian, and she had done some time doing missions trips and serving in India and helping out impoverished people and all this. And she had such a heart for people. And she was literally and brutally killed randomly by a total stranger, had no connection, no animosity. She had done nothing to deserve his actions. He admitted that he did it because he wanted to see what it felt like. All right. And then a year after he had killed her, almost to the day, he attacked somebody else who happened to go to the same church. And these people were friends. Now, he didn't choose them that way. It was quote unquote random, but it turned out that way. And granted, it was a small town, but still, people who knew each other, attended the same church, all this other stuff. He attacked her and she almost died, and it looked like she would, but she miraculously survived. And the interviewer, who's not a Christian, asked the question, said, do you ever question God? Why did you do this? Why did you allow this to happen to me? Does it make you angry at God that this happened to you? And they said, absolutely not. They saw this as, something to have to go through and a blessing that she survived. And at the same time, because of the attack, the second attack, almost a year after this guy killed the first girl, they had no witnesses. They had nothing. And so a year had gone by, and they had interviewed people that knew her and all the usual suspects that you might think. And they all loved this young lady and considered themselves her protectors. And so she had no enemies. She had no conflict with people, no, whatever. But this attack that occurred a year later was outdoors and they happened to be able to identify the person through surveillance video and cameras as he approached her. So this second attack served as, to say smoking gun, although he didn't use a gun, but still, you understand what I'm saying. That served as the key tool that linked him, because they got DNA from her attack that linked to DNA in the previous attack of the young girl. Anyway, to say that the second attack, as brutal and awful and random and tragic as it was the key to solve the murder from a year before. And so this couple, when they're being interviewed, saw the blessing that it was that they were able, through her experience, her awful experience, turned out to be the catalyst to get this guy off the streets and put him away in jail for good, in prison. And, you know, there's something about that Bible verse I shared with you earlier that changes our perspective, okay? And it's like when bad things happen, we can feel all the things. We're human, right? We're going to have human emotion and experience and reactions. But when we have the perception and the perspective of God that I'm going to use this, I'm going to repurpose this, this is going to build your faith, this is going to lead to something else that's going to bless somebody else's life. I mean, you can't even really think it through completely, because sometimes you're not going to understand until maybe years later. Maybe you'll never understand. But somewhere along the line, some good will come from it. You could just you just trust that. And so good things happen to bad people. Bad things happen to good people. Life is not based on merit, okay? Things that happen in our lives, but God allows things to happen in our lives for a greater purpose. And so if you're struggling, if you're going through it right now, is just ask God to use this for his purpose, to use this for his glory. And if there's something you need to learn and develop and grow by, then he will work it out for the good. If you love God, and if you're called according to his purpose, and say, God, I love you, and I want to be called for your purpose. So teach me what I need to teach, what I need to be taught, or help me to teach or be available to somebody else who's going through it and struggling through this themselves. So, you know, to say that's the answer to the mystery, you know, the people ask this question, oh, why do bad things happen to good people? That's how I look at it. And maybe you have, a different spin on that. Maybe you have a different experience. I'd love to hear from you. Feel free to share some comments about your experience. You don't have to go into great detail if you don't want, but, you know, maybe you can attest to this in your life. You went through something difficult and God absolutely used you in some profound way that otherwise might not have happened. So I'd love to hear from you, but I hope and I pray that this message encourages you and helps you think beyond your own perspective to really see what God may want to do through those difficult experiences from your life, or maybe somebody you love very much, very close to you, who's going through a difficult time in some way, that God wants to repurpose that and use that situation for a greater good, and to see God and try to see things from his vantage point to identify what that greater good may be, and understand that, you know, bad things are just going to happen. Death is going to come to us all at some point. That's just life. Okay. Nobody's gotten out of this life alive. You know, sorry to say that. And I don't mean to be the, bearer of doom and gloom. In fact, in a moment here, we'll cue up Nigel and his banjo and he'll lead us out. But at the same time, it's like, you know what? If we can have that perspective, maybe take some of the weight off of those difficulties. And it's like, I can't wait to see how God is going to repurpose this for his purpose. So I just want to encourage you with that. Be encouraged. Be an encourager. I look forward to talking to you again soon. Take care.
Thank you for joining the Coach Barnabas podcast. We'd greatly appreciate your support by liking and subscribing to the podcast and setting up notifications so we can let you know when new episodes are available. We'd love to hear from you, so please leave a comment. Make a difference today.